Started. Well, first of all, thank you everyone for joining us tonight. Um, a lot of folks, I think, who were there at the TSGE meeting and who attended our IPC breakfast already are aware of Laurie. But let me quickly introduce her again. So, Laurie Morgan is a medical practice management consultant out of California. She has a bachelor in economics from Brown and an MBA from Stanford. And I actually found out about her um, through Judy Capko's book. So, excellent book on practice management. And I called the office, and Laurie told me that Judy has kind of like retired, so I invited Laurie, and she did a phenomenal job at the meeting with her presentation. So it is my pleasure to invite Laurie again to give us a talk about tips for choosing and managing billing company and also RCM. So without any further ado, Laurie, please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Dr. Arora. I'm just delighted to have the chance to present again, especially because this is another of my favorite topics. Last time I spoke about MBA thinking. This time I'm speaking about outsourcing your billing. And it's a favorite topic of mine because so many of my practice management consulting clients are interested in either figuring out how to outsource their billing or whether to outsource their billing, or they're contemplating switching from a billing service they currently have to a different billing service, or in some cases, they're just, they just get in touch with me because the things are not going as well as they hope they would. And so we've got to figure out how to improve things. So the 5 tips I'm going to share with you come directly from those experiences working with real life practices as a my experiences working with real life practices as a consultant. So I'm going to start by talking about reasons that outsourcing can be a really great decision and reasons that may not be such, good reasons for making the decision to outsource. And the idea here is that I want to, with these 5 tips, help you get as much out of outsourcing if you can, if you decide to do it, and also avoid some of the most common pitfalls that I've seen. So, outsourcing can be a really positive thing. And these are some of the reasons why. One of the biggest probably that I encounter with my practice clients, especially smaller practices, is that the instability that can come when people leave and when you're never really able to feel like you're fully staffed up can be even greater when it comes to billing because you need that special expertise. And so outsourcing can all but erase that problem, right? You can outsource to a billing service that has more people on staff, and there's just less concern that your billing is going to be disrupted by people leaving. You can also potentially gain expertise. Sometimes billing services will know more about how to bill effectively than your in-house biller might, and that can lead to better results. You might be able to conserve space. I mean, these days you might achieve the same thing, of course, by allowing some people to work at home, but you might conserve space in a way that is a little bit easier to manage than having your own actual employees working at home. You might get the help of a certified coder. That's something that many of my clients are interested in, but it's not always easy to justify having a certified coder on staff if you are a smaller practice, or making the time or financially supporting a biller that wants to pursue that. And then also, sometimes you may be already thinking that your technology is not all that it could be. I mean, these days, there are so many recent improvements to billing and patient portal and other software for collecting money that you really shouldn't be suffering with anything that isn't the current state of the art. And if you're thinking about making such a change, that may present an opportunity to think about whether it's also time to switch up how you're performing the billing. And then finally, you might save a little bit of money too, although I should have put a little asterisk on that one for reasons I will get to down the road. So those were some of the good reasons to switch. There are also some bad reasons. And when my practice clients have used these sorts of reasons to justify outsourcing, in some cases, that's where the trouble starts. So, for example, probably the single biggest mistake and the most tempting mistake is assuming that when you outsource, you're just going to make the pain go away and you're going to set it and forget it. And that billing service is just going to take care of everything and you don't have to worry about it anymore. That can really lead, in the best case, it can lead to underperformance. In the worst case, it can lead to even bigger problems than the ones that prompted you to make the decision to outsource. Also, if you're thinking about outsourcing, I always advise that you try to do a thorough analysis, because sometimes it seems so obvious that the problem is the billers. If you have in-house billers and maybe they're difficult to deal with, and there are conflicts between those billers and the front desk, and it's becoming way too difficult to manage, and all the fingers are pointing at billing. Sometimes there's a little bit more to it than that, and so just flipping that switch before really being sure what's going on can set the set the new billers up for a failure if you haven't really figured out how to fix things. And then, as I mentioned in the last slide, the cheapest possible billing, aiming for that may not be the best way to get the quality billing that you need to make sure that you're maximizing your collections and that things are really running smoothly. So my first tip deals directly with that idea of setting it and forgetting it. Really, you ideally won't do that. I always recommend that you treat your billers as part of your team. And a good billing service is going to want to feel like part of your team too. Of course, they are independent contractors. They're not literally your employees, but they want to be engaged with you if they're a good service oriented billing service, and you should welcome that, right? You really need to work together to make sure that the workflow is efficient. And when you have an outsourced billing department, that actually can change the workflow up quite a bit. And anything that slows down the workflow will slow down your billing and potentially, in the worst case, lead to things like timely filing problems or missed bills. So really, the workflow starts long before the billing department gets involved. It starts primarily with eligibility and demographics collection, but truly it even starts before that, because you really want to make sure that your front desk is properly preparing patients to pay, and really checking with patients so that they know for sure that their insurance is accepted. And so working together to make sure that all those bases are covered is so important to having an effective outsourcing relationship. You also want to continue minding the money. Sometimes I see like a practice manager or a physician owner just feels like they don't have time to deal with the reconciliation every month. And I totally get it, because it's extremely tedious, but it really has to be handled inside your practice. You don't want to outsource that. And because it's your money, that's really the lifeblood of the business side of your practice. And you also want to set boundaries on how much a billing service can write off and how collections will be handled. And those are things you have to work on together. Also, I have found that when you're so frustrated with billing and you're thinking, oh my gosh, I just can't take it anymore, I cannot wait to offload this, that kind of hands-off attitude can lead to further bad decisions down the road, because you just may not ask important questions about what the technology, what technology is going to be used and what kind of reports you'll have access to. You'll basically become more and more hands-off once you've decided to sort of leave it to them. And that can lead to more trouble down the road, which in turn can lead to more switching, which costs money and causes disruption. So the bottom line here is, my tip is to manage it almost the same as you would employees in-house. And knowing what metrics to look at and how to keep communication flowing are absolutely key. So by actively managing, I have a few little sub tips on this subject of actively managing. One thing I think can be really important is to establish an internal liaison. You really want to have somebody in your office who is the main person that billing talks to, and you want to have someone on the billing side who is the main contact. That way, there's someone who can support the billing service when they need information, and there's someone that can support you when you need help. Now, if you're a very small office, that may simply be your practice manager. But if you have a few more employees, that may be your front desk manager, or it may be your one of your current billing team if you're going to outsource, but you want to keep one or more of them around. Um, and then for communication, I strongly advise that you have standing meetings. I'm actually working with a client now, not in gastro, they're in OB, but we have set up a weekly standard meeting, and it has worked phenomenally well. Sometimes the meetings are only 5 or 10 minutes long because we don't have too many issues to discuss. But when we do have an issue, there is always going to be an opportunity at least once a week. And these would be those standing meetings I'm talking about would be for the liaison, for anyone involved in your practice in billing, and then also anyone on the billing side that you work with regularly. You also want to make sure that it's easy for the billers to get in touch with your clinicians in the event that a denial or a documentation issue or coding issue has to be resolved. Sometimes, especially external billers, they can be a little bit intimidated to, they don't want to feel like they're pestering a physician. So making sure that that's welcomed is really important. And you also want to make sure that the billing service may have their own idea of what reports you need, but often it doesn't necessarily match up with what you're used to looking at or what you would like to receive. So make sure you work together to come up with the regular reports that are going to provide to you. And also keep in mind that their reports don't replace the regular analysis that you or your practice manager can do to verify things and just make sure you're tracking the metrics that are important to you. So I kind of explained this already, but basically the idea of the billing liaison role is that it's a point of contact so that the billers are never left hanging. And they're also your advocate with the billing service. So, right, they're sort of a kinder, gentler form of a squeaky wheel so that you're top of mind with the billing service. They can troubleshoot problems. If people need to be retrained, they can do that. You're working with the service. If you have someone on your staff who's a super user, somebody who is really the most sophisticated person in dealing with your practice management system, that may be a good person for this role. That kind of connects to the last bullet. Sometimes you need a growth path for somebody who is being sidelined. If you are outsourcing, maybe the volume is just too much and you don't want to just let the person who's doing the job now go. You value them, it's just too much. Then this could be a next step for that person. You also want to make sure that you have unrestricted access to all the billing data. This is super important. It should be clear in your contract. Remember that reports can be manipulated, even unintentionally. Manipulated maybe is the wrong word there, but they don't always say exactly what you might think they say. For example, an AR report might be re-aged, meaning that the receivables are redated to the last time the patient paid. Well, if the patient had a $1,500 balance and they paid $10, that's not a huge dent. And now it might be showing up as 0 to 30 days old when in fact it might be over a year old. So you really need to understand what kind of settings are used for the reports and be able to run your own to avoid doubt, or for your manager, of course, who may be doing the bulk of running these reports. Another pitfall is that AR reporting sometimes includes credit balances, and that can make the AR look a lot better than it actually is. So these are just some examples of some of the things you need to watch out for. And having your own access to reports makes sure that you can. You also want to have your own access to reports because you want to be able to confirm the percentage that they're, or the collections that they're using to calculate the monthly service fee, which is typically a percentage of collections. You want to just be able to verify that, or your manager should be able to verify that. And by the way, that advice came to me from a billing service manager. So, they shouldn't object to you doing that. They will actually expect you to do that. So tip number two, this is important for avoiding that terrible experience of jumping out of the frying pan and into the fire and going through a disruptive transition only to find out that you didn't really solve the problems you were hoping to solve. So doing a thorough assessment of your billing workflow and identifying all the places where information can be misplaced or not properly flowing through, where there might be a training issue, all of these things that can potentially be the cause of whatever problems you're experiencing. And everyone, in the office is happy to just point the finger at the biller, right? But maybe there are a lot of other things going on that could be improved. And you don't want to perpetuate those things or amplify that dysfunction by adding a whole new third-party organization to the mix before you've really identified and fixed those things. And sometimes if you do that sort of analysis, you may find that you don't want to outsource at all. Maybe you just want to work on the current setup to improve it. Whether you decide to outsource or not, you'll be learning from that experience, and that will give you a better result going forward with your billing. And you want to just make sure that your practice manager and your team develop the habit of continuous improvement. And the other thing is that this disciplined process of digging into your current setup will help reveal the full scope of your needs. It's amazing how many little things you don't realize will have an impact on your relationship with an external biller. There are probably all kinds of little things that your current biller is just dealing with, things that would otherwise slip through the cracks. And so you need to really dig in to make sure you can find out what all those things are. And so once you have that complete list, it helps you to get those needs on the table and make sure that the outsource partner you're considering working with can handle all of those things. That brings me to tip number three. You want to use that process of analysis to build a detailed question list, right? You want to think through the possible service types you can work with and what are the trade-offs with each type of setup. You want to be clear on your operational needs and the idiosyncrasies of your practice and what you're willing to change or not willing to change in order to work better with the billing service. You want to learn what you need to know about your own staffing, because sometimes when you're outsourcing, depending on what your partner can or can't do, you may need to keep at least one person to help facilitate the relationship, as I was discussing previously. And so you need to know that. You need to understand how this is going to change your staffing. And of course, you need to make note of what the deal killers are to save time. So I'm not going to read through all of these. I am going to make the slides actually are already on my website, and I'll give you the URL for that at the end of the talk so you can look through this. And but I will spotlight a couple of things. And also, I just want to say that if you have any questions that you think of after the talk, you're welcome to email me. My email will also be on the last slide. But so I just want to very briefly explain that I see the world of potential billing services as kind of three different categories. There are the RCM, revenue cycle management services that technology vendors offer. That's like where your EHR vendor, your EHR and practice management platform has set up their own billing service. And that can be a good first place to look, because it is sort of the path of least resistance, right? You won't have to change anything typically, or you should test that assumption, but typically you won't have to change anything, and that can make the whole conversion process easier. But on the downside, they may not be able to do everything that you need. So, for example, I was just involved in the search for a new billing service for a client, and initially we were pretty much assuming that we'd go with the tech platform, but there were just too many things that they weren't able to take on, and so we had to look for a different solution. Now, one of the possible different solutions would be to go with a regional or national service, right? This is kind of a somewhat larger company. Maybe it's 30 to 100 employees. They do billing remotely for lots of different locations, and it'll give you maybe some of the benefits of working with your tech vendor. It will probably be a little bit more expensive on a fee basis, but you will get a little bit more attention. So, by the way, for both of these types of setups, you really want to understand, will you have a dedicated rep to deal with? How will you get the training and the attention that you need? And you want to know a little bit about whether they are experienced with your specialty. If they're not experienced with your specialty, in my view, that's not always a deal killer, but you do want to know how they've handled it when they've taken on a client whose specialty they're not as familiar with in the past. You want to know how quickly they're going to be able to get up to speed. And then the last category of billing service may even just be your current biller who might go independent, right? And you could have a solo independent contractor as your quote unquote billing service, or it just might be a small local, 3 to 5 person billing company who does this for you. And, this can be great from the point of view of having much better service and easier access. But there, the questions will be, do they have enough people to give that stability of staffing that you're trying to get by outsourcing? So these are just some sample questions that you might want to ask. I'm not aiming to cover everything here, but these are some things to think about. So for example, with workflow and data, if you work with external systems, like if you work at an ASC and they have a different system, or in a hospital, how does that information get over to the billing service? And are they willing to deal with multiple systems? Are they able to deal with them? Do those organizations allow that? Are you still on paper by chance? Some of you may be laughing, but some people actually still are on paper super bills, and you'll have to make some special accommodations for that. Patient billing is an important area where assumptions can lead you astray. Like, you really need to make sure that that's part of what you would get, that they would be doing the statements and also doing the follow-up collections. Billing adjacent tasks, you'll have not just some questions to ask, but also some decisions to make. Do you want them handling your credentialing and contracting, or do you need them to handle your eligibility or prior authorizations? And then, oh, hold on, I actually here. This is, I'm trying to see what I wrote there. Okay. Sorry about that. You want to know who's going to work on your business, and who will be your point of contact. So you also want to ask about the details of reporting and oversight. For example, how are missed charges tracked down? It's very, very easy when you make a switch for charges to get missed, and perhaps you need someone in the office periodically spot checking the schedule against what's actually been billed, just for example of a way that that can be avoided. And you also want to ask them how they evaluate their own performance. For example, it's a good thing to hear that they pay close attention to the lag time between your services and when bills are sent out. Of course, I've already mentioned you want to make sure you have access to all the data and the full report suite, and you want to make sure you won't lose any practice management features you rely on. These last two questions, in particular, are most commonly issues when you're dealing with a tech vendor platform. Usually, if you're working with the other two types of businesses, they're going to be logging in and using your system as it is. So just a few quick mini cases of some things that have gone wrong related to these last few points. So a couple of years ago, I worked with a client who had contracted with their EHR vendor to provide RCM solution, an RCM solution, and the vendor had not offered it before, and they told my client that they were going to be adding the practice management software of one of the most respected solutions in that part of our tech landscape. And so it all sounded really great, but what my client didn't realize, and what they never really made explicitly clear, was that it was going to be a stripped down version. And so the RCM service was full of people who were not very experienced. It was a brand new service, and my client and his practice manager were unable to get into the data because it was the system was so stripped down. So it's really important to make sure that you're going to get the full version of the practice management system, not some stripped down version that keeps everything kind of hidden behind a wall. I also worked with a client who used a practice management systems vendor RCM solution. And in this case, they were vascular surgeons, and it was very common for them to work on two legs in on a for a single in a single operation, right? The patient would come in and both legs would be done. Well, the payers were assuming that those two legs submitted were duplicates and therefore only paying for one. And the RCM service didn't understand how to apply the right modifier and just was accepting the adjudication. So that's a perfect example of something where there's a specialty work that's really important for your new billing service to understand. We in this OB practice that I just mentioned, the billing service misunderstood the hospitalist relationship. So when babies were delivered by a hospitalist, the billing service assumed that meant that the practice was not going to bill for that or get paid, but actually the practice had a separate contract with the hospital, and so the bills were supposed to be sent out directly by the practice. So that was something that led to some missed revenue for a time. And just in general, practices can be too reliant on the billing services reporting and not running their own. They can be not quick enough to respond when the billing service has questions and needs help, or practices just no one realizes, this happens so often, that nobody is following up on the patient's statements, right? That is just something where everyone's assuming that the other side is doing it. So if you're having to do a conversion, there are a few other questions you just want to keep in mind. Will the new service be able to help you with your old AR? If you're switching systems, that may mean that they definitely can't, and you may need to keep your current people on to do that. Will you keep the same clearinghouse? This may be important if you rely on the clearinghouse for reports or if they produce your statements. And also just what kind of integration will you have? Will you be able to make the most of the connection between the EHR and the practice management system? So my fourth tip is to look at the contract as soon as you can. So if you are talking with different potential billing services, especially a tech vendor, it's often possible to get a boilerplate, sort of template version of the contract and take a look at it before you get too far down the road in discussions. That can be super helpful because sometimes there are things that are just non-starters for you, and you can eliminate them. You can eliminate the service as a candidate if they're not willing to change these things. So for example, it should be clear that you own all your data. It should be clear that the funds that are collected are delivered to your bank account and not to a bank account owned by the company, by the billing company. You should understand whether the term and termination rules are acceptable to you, and you want to make sure that they're going to be not just signing a business associates agreement for HIPAA, but also committing to ongoing training and doing everything it takes to protect your data. And then once you actually get to the later stage and receive your first draft of the contract, you also want to make sure that any special considerations you negotiated are documented in that contract. Above all, your contract should not be signed until you're sure there's a meeting of the minds. If you don't understand any of the terms, make sure that you get clear about it before you sign anything and run it by trusted advisors. If you were working with me, I would be happy to take a look. And of course, if you have an attorney, they should take a look too. And then finally, my last tip is that you want to make sure that ongoing training will be available, both for your team and the billing service. So this perhaps applies most if you're thinking about working with a tech platform, but just in general, you want to make sure that you're getting trained on all of the different changes to the platform. And then more generally, whatever type of service you're working with, you want to make sure that continuing ed is kind of part of their DNA, right? You want to make sure that they're as committed to sharpening their skills as you would be, right? In your profession. You want to make sure that someone there is keeping on top of coding changes so that they can share that with your clinical team. And you also want to make sure they're staying on top of any changes to HIPAA. Once you've made the decision to outsource, one final thought. These are just some common problems that you should be watching for, especially in the beginning, because these can kind of signal that things aren't going well and you want to nip these kinds of problems in the bud right away. So if you're hearing patient complaints, that can be a red flag. You want to make sure that patients know where to go to get their questions answered and that the billing service is capable of dealing with those questions, or if not, or if it's not part of the contract, make sure someone on your side is able to give patients what they need. You want to keep a close eye on the AR growth, and if it's changing, if suddenly you're seeing those buckets balloon, you want to make sure you understand what the cause of that is. You want to keep an eye on the lag time to bill so that you don't end up with any timely filing issues. If there are unusual or growing adjustments or write-offs, that's another red flag to watch for. If they're presenting you with any metrics that you don't understand, you want to make sure that you get their help so that you understand what the data they're presenting to you and to your practice manager actually means. And then just more generally, there's always going to be a ramp up time when you switch to a new billing service. I usually expect that it'll take about 3 to 6 months for them to get fully rolling. But if it's looking like it's going to take longer than that, that's when you should start to be a little bit concerned. So I mentioned that, well, first of all, if there's still time, I'm happy to take some questions tonight. And I'm also able to accept them, via email. Feel free to get in touch with me. And you can also download these slides at my website at capco.com/5tips.pdf.
Perfect. Laurie, thank you so much. Excellent presentation.